What's up, guys? So today I'm making a video about ENTPs once again, making another video, hopefully going to shed some new light on some topics regarding ENTPs and how we work and function as an MBTI type. So what I wanted to do was kind of draw a picture in your mind. If you're not an ENTP and you don't know how we work, we may seem a little strange and bizarre, and the way we deal with things in our environment is so much different than how everyone else does. And because of that, we tend to be a little misunderstood as people, as individuals. We tend to be misunderstood, and I think we tend to embrace that more often than we should. We tend to simply just embrace the fact that we're different, which is okay. But when you embrace the fact that you're being misunderstood and that there's just no way that other people are going to understand how you work and how you think, I think that that's detrimental to us ENTPs. I would like to urge my fellow ENTPs, if you're out there watching this, to become better at explaining how you come to conclusions and why you came to the conclusions that you did, and how your mind is different than other people. I want to urge you to become better at just explaining yourself, because it's more important than you think. To become a mature ENTP, to benefit society in any way, a person must, or an ENTP in this case, must be credible as a person. And because us ENTPs are often seen as the inventors and the people coming up with new creative concepts and ideas and thoughts, new perspectives on things, I think we have a lot to benefit society. But I also think that we should focus a lot on learning to explain ourselves, because our credibility relies on other people, our audiences, understanding us as people and how we work. Otherwise, you're not gonna give much credit to an idea that comes from a person who is seen as crazy, or is seen as someone who is often switching between topics and disorganized and eccentric and weird and odd. People that fall under that category don't typically tend to benefit society very much, because their audience just discredits them. And quite frankly, the ENTP community, from what I've seen, needs to get better at explaining ourselves. So today I'm going to attempt to illustrate what goes on inside my head, or ENTPs' heads, when they're thinking, their thought processes. And I'm going to compare that to the thought processes of the other types, or most other people. So the ENTP is like 3% of the population. I think it's speculated to be, we are somewhere around 3% of the population are speculated to be ENTP. So that makes us pretty rare. And because of that, we are very different than the rest of society. We have a different way of dealing with things. So naturally, we're going to be misunderstood. So hopefully this illustration helps a little bit. The ENTP's mind. Okay, so picture a tree, a large canopy of leaves above you that goes on for forever, seemingly. It just keeps going until it's out of sight. But all these leaves connect to one giant tree. So it's not a forest. It's just one tree. For the purpose of this illustration, just try to imagine that. That is an ENTP's mind. The ENTP gathers information. In this case, the leaves on that canopy from that one tree. Each leaf represents a single unit of information that an ENTP has gathered and placed in their head somewhere. As you can see, it becomes very hard to organize a giant canopy of leaves that are all connected to one another. And in translation, it becomes very hard to organize a bunch of information if it's just connected to all the other information floating around inside your head. That's an ENTP's mind. That's why it's so difficult for an ENTP to focus. That's why it's so difficult for them to bring the conversation to one single point. That's why they have a tendency to jump around in topic and confuse the heck out of some of the more grounded, more organized types in conversation. And yeah, so that's pretty much the reason why we ENTPs are the way we are, is because of our thinking process. And I think that provides an accurate representation of what it's like inside our minds when we're trying to think. There's really no system of organization. All of the information inside my head right now is just flowing around, or you could imagine it as a tree, and it's all connected, and it's all just disorganized in there, and I can pick and pull from that tree of information inside my head. I can pick and pull topics from all over, and they may not seem related to a non-ENTP or someone who thinks differently than an ENTP, but to an ENTP, he's just like, well, it's just information. It's this whole tree represents the big picture that I'm trying to explain, or that I'm trying to understand, rather, because an ENTP loves to understand the things around him. He doesn't, or he or she doesn't really appreciate the details of what's happening around them. They like the concepts and the theories of what's happening around them, because that helps them understand the world and how it's working, their world. So anyway, with that being said, now I want you to recognize a field or a pasture full of grass and weeds, and just like a prairie. This large expanse of vegetation is a fairly accurate representation, I feel like, of how other people, most of the world, thinks. Their thought process, in other words. I feel like that's an accurate representation of what their thought process is like. So once again, I want you to imagine this large expanse of vegetation, this like a prairie or a meadow or something, but it keeps going on for miles, just like the canopy of trees. Excuse me. And this prairie is it's consisted of, this is a prairie consisting of a diverse system of plants that create this prairie, this ecosystem. Now, as you can tell, as you probably know, if you know anything about fields and meadows of grass as compared to trees, as compared to one tree, the organization there is quite, the differences in the organization there between the two is quite significant. And that's why we're so different. But anyway, back to the meadow. I'm kind of jumping around here. The meadow, each individual unit, like the blades of grass, each individual blade of grass, or each individual weed itself, is translates to, for the purpose of this analogy, it translates to an individual morsel or piece of knowledge or information inside the mind of a non-ENTP, inside the mind of most of the world. Now, as you probably know, like I said before, the organization is different. There really is no organization in a tree, in a canopy from one tree. It's just all connected to that one tree. It's just all information. But there is a system of organization in a meadow, and that system of organization depends on the meadow, which translates to the system of organization of information depends on the person, but for the most part they're all really similar in classifying and organizing information. Like I said, the weeds and the grass, the single units, represent the information, and if you roped off a section of that pasture or field, you'd see that there are similar species and types of plants of a similar nature in a certain area of a field, and you can rope those off, classify that certain area of the field as an area of study, or a category, for a better term, a category. So they've categorized their information into sections of similar species or pieces of information. Like they see it as similar. But then if you take a section of field or if you take a section of pasture from one end, and then one from miles away, from maybe even hundreds of miles away, it's not going to be anything alike, and it's going to be completely different. The species within those two pieces of ground are going to be different. Therefore, that translates to the information between certain categories is going to be different. And when an ENTP is talking to someone who categorizes information that way, it becomes hard to relate for an ENTP, and it becomes hard for others to relate to ENTPs because they classify information in such a different manner. So, with that being said, hopefully that kind of allows ENTPs to understand a little bit better about how people think, and hopefully that allows non-ENTPs to understand us better. Because like I said before, it's very important or I see it as very important anyway, to remain credible to your audience. And I think that that's an important step in remaining credible, is making sure that your audience understands how you came to the conclusions that you came to, or how you produced the product that you did. Well, I could go a little further and say that, and provide a sort of different example if that didn't really clear anything up. Hopefully those analogies and those metaphors made sense. If they didn't, you can shoot me a comment and I can kind of clear that up. It makes sense inside my head. Sometimes when I'm talking, I get kind of sidetracked and then I don't say everything that I want to. That's why these videos are kind of hard for me to make, but I'm trying. So, hopefully that cleared something up. And I'm going to provide a different example of how an ENTP's mind works, how my mind works anyway. As an ENTP, when I hear a piece of information, I start to make these connections between other pieces of information that are already inside my head, and then I start to formulate questions based on multiple pieces of information rather than just that one piece of information. So let's use this example. Since I'm really interested in dietetics and nutritional science right now, I'll just use the words cocoa, or the substance cocoa powder. When most of the world hears cocoa powder, they're going to think chocolate, and then they're going to stop thinking, and then they may think of a few questions and whatnot regarding chocolate, but that's about as far as their thought process goes. But when I hear the word cocoa powder, I make the connection. I can choose to make the connection, or my mind automatically sometimes makes the connection to, if I hear cocoa powder in conversation, I'll think of antioxidants, flavonoids. I can draw connections to medicine because of that. Free radicals, oxidative stress, all that kind of damage, aerobic damage. Then I could go back to cocoa powder and then make the connection or leap in topic to Mesoamerica, because the Aztecs used to use cacao beans as currency, and I could go to different currencies around the world, or I could go to currency in general. I could go to the history of bartering. I could go to so many other things, or I could go back to Mesoamerica, go make the leap to Aztecs, Mayans, Incas, their cultures, their different traditions, or I could go to things like geology, just because all of the people in the Americas were believed to have crossed the land bridge somewhere between Alaska and Asia, or just different theories regarding the movement of mankind, civilization. I could go to geology. I could go to Pangea because of geology. I could go to anthropology. I could go to societies around the world and I could go to how there's pyramids everywhere around the world and how they were all used for similar purposes. So going back to the original illustration of the large canopy of leaves, cocoa powder would represent one leaf in that canopy. And because all those other things I just said are different leaves, but they're still connected to the cocoa powder, if that makes any sense. That's just another way of summing up how our brains work as ENTPs, how we're able to leap between different things, and to someone who's not an ENTP, it's almost like we haven't come to a single point. We tend to come up with more questions than we had to start with because of that. So yeah, me personally, it's been hard to stick with. It's been hard to commit to things, and it's been hard to stick with certain areas of study in college and stuff because I don't see certain categories of knowledge like other people do, so they can choose to pursue one singular category of study, while I want to see the big picture. So I want to see all categories of study. I don't see categories really. I just see study. I see information to be gathered to create a bigger picture, because I'm curious about how the world works, but I don't like the details. I like the bigger picture. So as you can see, it can become hard for an ENTP to commit to one area of study, so they tend to not know what to do with their, as far as like a career path or just a life path in general. It's so hard to remain consistent as an ENTP. Yeah, so this is just kind of like a summary of how ENTPs function. It kind of turned into, I don't know, I kind of went off on several tangents, which is usually, or it's a usual occurrence when you're in conversation with an ENTP. Yeah, these videos are really hard for me to make because staying on topic and not messing up going off topic is so hard. But anyway, hopefully this cleared some things up for non-ENTPs, and hopefully the ENTPs heard my message earlier in the video about trying to make sure that other people understand them better.